Alright, to be totally honest with you, I used to be a huge hater of budget cinema lenses, and then I used the Vespid IIs. Now, you're probably watching this video because you want to know if this set of lenses is the right fit for you. Whether you're brand new to the cinema lens world, or you're just finally looking to pick up a set for yourself, hopefully I can answer some of these questions for you by going through and just letting you know my thoughts with the amount of time that I've had with these lenses. I'll show you a few comparisons between the Vespid IIs and the Sony G Master lenses, and hopefully at the end of this video you will have a little more clarity on if this lens set is the right move for you. If this is your first time tuning into the channel, my name is Jordan Polmano and I am a commercial cinematographer based in Central California. I do a lot of work ranging from broadcast commercials to social media ads, and I also work in the music industry as a touring videographer, so the type of lenses that I need are kind of always changing based on the project I'm shooting. Just for full transparency, I did team up with DZO for these videos. I did purchase these lenses with my own money, and then they reached out after the fact and they ended up sending me a set of the Arles Primes to also make a review video on. So I'm doing a review video of the Vespid IIs. I'll also do a video on the Arles Primes coming out shortly after this, and I'll show you a little bit between the two, size comparisons and stuff like that. But I did purchase the Vespid IIs with my own money. I just wanted you all to have that information so you can do with it what you need as I talk about these lenses in the video. Running through the base overview of these lenses, this comes in a 6-lens kit priced at $6,289 at the time of filming this video, or you can also get most of these lenses separately for $1,199, and the 18 and 105 come in at $1,299. In the 6-lens kit, you're getting an 18, 24, 35, 50, 85, and 105 millimeter, all T1.9 across the board. We have a 77 millimeter thread on the inside, and the outer diameter is 80 millimeters. All of these lenses have the same 0.8 pitch on the gears, and they also have the same 300-degree focus rotation. So across each lens are going to be essentially identical, which just makes swapping lenses and recalibrating a focus motor so much easier. Another big upgrade that they added to this lens, which I'll probably never get to use, is the Cook Eye technology. So this just transmits metadata of the lens for use in virtual production, VFX, stuff like that. This set covers full frame and VistaVision sensors, and they are all a constant T1.9, which is an upgrade from the 2.1 that was in the original Vespids. Now, these currently only come in PL mount, so you don't have the interchangeable options like the original Vespids had. You can only get them in PL, which arguably is a much stronger mount, but it does mean that you have to use an adapter for most cameras. But luckily we have things like this Mofage Paco drop-in filter adapter. This is a PL to RF mount, so I can throw it across all of my Canon cameras. And what's great about this combined with the Vespid IIs is the Vespid IIs are able to accept rear filters. So you can use a drop-in filter set like this, which is very helpful because it just eliminates the need for using a matte box if I don't want to do that. This adapter comes with a variable ND that ranges from 0.3 all the way to 2.4, and much like the build quality of the Vespid lens itself, this adapter is actually built very well, and I've been pretty impressed with just how it works. The ability to use rear filters with the Vespid II lenses is just another reason why this set of lenses is a great option for smaller mirrorless cameras. These lenses are now also all of the same size from 18 to 105 with a slight variance in weight. It's not terrible, but what I've noticed when balancing on a gimbal is you can balance from 18 to 35 at one setting, and then when you move from 50 to 105, you do have to adjust it just slightly. It's not like totally throwing off the balance by any means. You could probably even get away with not having to recalibrate or rebalance, but that's just what I noticed, kind of the weight shift when you move from 35 to 50 and onward. Inside the lens is a 10-blade iris, which creates this very nice spherical bokeh. It does compress a little bit based on your focal lengths, but I still just really love that look and character that these lenses give. There's also a lot of optical upgrades to the Vespid 2s, including a new lens coating, which is actually the same lens coating that are in the Arles Prime. So you're going to get similar color reproduction, and you can kind of match these lenses to the Arles Primes a little easier. The only difference would obviously be the focus fall off on the Arles Primes being at 1.4. It's going to be a little different than the 1.9 here, and the Arles Primes are going to have a little more of that soft fall off, that blend. So they have slight character differences while still kind of living within that same world of a clean, high contrast lens. This glass coating gives this lens a much warmer look, and you can see here between the Vespid 2 and the Sony GM how much warmer it is. If you're shooting on Sony, it might start to push a little green depending on your lighting and shooting situation, so you might need to compensate a little bit for that if you're not as much of a fan of that look. I typically shoot on Canon, so it wasn't as noticeable until I shot these examples on Sony. But the warmth of these lenses really does add a nice look, especially during golden hour. The focus breathing on these Vespid 2s is not bad, but there is a little bit of it. You can see here in this Vespid 2 35mm shot, there is a little bit of breathing there. It's not terrible, and of course, depending on what you're shooting, it most likely isn't really going to affect your shot. Now, if you look at the Arles 35, there's quite a bit less focus breathing, so it's a little more improved there. But of course, both of these are going to be way better than a stills lens. So here's the Sony GM 35mm, and you can see the focus breathing is pretty intense. So that's something to consider with the Vespid 2s. It's not terrible, but it is not non-existent. It exists a little bit. Here's a quick flaring test between the Vespid 2 and the Arles Primes. I noticed that the Vespid 2 maintains contrast a little bit better than the Arles Primes, likely due to the fact that it's a 1.9 and not a 1.4. But they both look really nice. They are spherical lenses, so you're going to get that kind of standard rounded flare. Alright, quick little setup change while I edit this video here. This section is specifically for those who are brand new to the cinema lens world or have never really even used manual lenses. If you are familiar with cinema lenses, you can skip to the next part. I'll have chapters below here, but a few things to consider before you take the plunge into the cinema lens world. Obviously, a cinema lens is going to be fully manual. You don't have autofocus, you don't have stabilization, everything is fully manual. So if you rely on autofocus and all of that, then probably not going to make sense to use a cinema lens. Of course, there is LiDAR, but that comes with the added gear that you have to add to your camera, and it might not make sense for you to have all of that stuff when you're running around and capturing whatever you're capturing. Now, the con of the stills lens, although it has autofocus, most likely stabilized, and it's incredibly sharp, you are restricted to some things. One would be if you do want to get into like the narrative world or the commercial world or anything where you are setting up a shot and trying to replicate it, it's much more difficult to replicate your focus poles on a stills lens. Most likely, if you are running a stills lens, it's focus by wire, which means one, you don't have the focus marks that you would on a cinema lens, but also the focus throw is going to be much shorter than on a cinema lens. So what I mean by that is, let's say the distance it takes to get from 4 feet to 10 feet on a cinema lens is the difference of going that far. On a stills lens, it might be as shallow as like barely turning it, if that makes sense. I know this is out of focus when I say that, but it is much harder to replicate a shot with stills lenses. If you are manually focusing a lens for a shot and you need to do multiple takes, which you always are in narrative and commercial, it makes much more sense to have a cinema lens where either you or your first AC, if you have one pulling focus, can set the marks. You have your marks on the side of the lens. You know exactly where this lens needs to be from your point A to your point B, and you can replicate that as many times as you need. It's much harder to do that on a stills lens. Now, one of the big cons to a cinema lens, you are going to, no matter how small the cinema glass is, you're going to be adding extra weight to your camera. If you have a cinema lens on your camera, you are most likely going to have a follow focus or a follow focus motor, depending on how your setup is. There's going to be extra things you need to add to your camera to properly use this lens. I could go on and on about the pros and cons of shooting cinema lenses versus stills lenses, but there's really no right or wrong answer. It really comes down to what makes the most sense for you. And why did I buy a set of cinema lenses? Well, I typically have kind of two thresholds of jobs. I have the threshold of jobs where all of my camera gear comes from a rental house. This is the higher budget commercial, let's call it. We're shooting on the caliber of gear that I will probably never own because it doesn't make sense to, because that takes up maybe 60% of my work throughout the year. The other 40% of that is that smaller budget owned gear threshold. So this is a job where I'm bringing just the gear that I own. It's still kind of the same type of jobs that I'm doing at the larger scale, just more stripped back, less resources. I'm using everything I own. Typically, I'm shooting on RF lenses. I have the RF zoom kind of trinity of lenses. Now, of course, stills lenses totally get the job done, but I find myself on a lot of these jobs wishing I had that characteristic of a cinema lens set. So for me, if I was going to own a cinema lens set versus rent a cinema lens set, it needs to be practical for the highest percentage of jobs possible. The first biggest factor for me is going to be the size of it. And when it came down to trying to figure out if the Arles primes or the Vespid 2s made more sense, I mean, look at the size difference here. It's pretty crazy. This is, I think, literally half the weight of this. Size-wise makes way more sense. I travel a ton on airplanes, so I'm not going to check these lenses. And if I am traveling with these, it's probably a situation where I'm just bringing like 2 lenses with me. These fit in a backpack so much easier. I can throw this on a Ronin with no issue because they're so light. Even with the PL mount adapter on it, it's still totally fine. You can throw this on a gimbal, it'll balance fine, but remember, I still have to have a gear on here. Depending on the camera I'm shooting on, I have to put a matte box, or I have the drop-in filter, but there's more stuff that has to go on the camera, so the lighter the better when it comes to gimbal work, and this allows me to get that flare of a cinema prime lens while still maintaining the small form factor. So that was the biggest deciding factor on this. It doesn't matter that this is a 1.4, this is a beautiful lens, and you know, this is kind of the ideal situation. This is the more practical situation and still gives me almost everything that this lens gives me. So that's kind of the reasoning why I bought this lens versus the Arles primes. Of course, easy to say that when I have these in my possession now, but the more I've used these, it's kind of just reiterated the reasoning behind purchasing these initially, and it makes sense. Now, I'll probably end up using these together in some way in the future, especially, for example, I do like interview days where we're just shooting interviews and then shooting B-roll kind of in tandem. I'll use these for interviews because they look incredible. Interview setups are locked off for the most part, and then these will live on a gimbal or on a handheld B-roll camera, and this will be kind of the B-roll lens. So there are plenty of ways for me to kind of use both, but in a practical sense, I'm probably going to be using the Vespids for a high percentage of the jobs I do. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a ramble fest and you got some clarity out of that, but I wanted to make sure I added my thoughts on how I will use both of these, why I bought the Vespids over the Arles primes, just so you kind of could see where I'm coming from. So yeah, that kind of rounds up my initial thoughts on the Vespid 2s, how I use them and how they are a practical use for me. Hopefully this is helpful for you if you are looking into these lenses. I know when I was researching for myself, I watched a ton of videos and they were incredibly helpful, so hopefully this can just be added to the list of a helpful video for you. If you did enjoy it, be sure to give it a thumbs up, say hello in the comments, and consider subscribing to the channel if you're not already. Also, be sure to look out for my next review on the Arles primes, which should be coming out shortly after this. But that's going to do it for me on this video. Thank you so much for watching.